Hello and welcome to our webinar, Building Better Customer Support Using Documentation and Technology for Success. I'm Greer Lynch, VP Marketing at Mavenoid, and I'm joined here by two experts today. We have Tim Milbrath, Sales Director at Allman, and Tom Bellhumer, Senior Enterprise Executive at Mavenoid. Welcome.
Great to be here.
Thanks for having us.
Welcome. Before we dive into our discussion, I'd just like you both to introduce yourselves and the companies you work with. So, Tim, can you start us off?
Absolutely. Hello, Tim Milbrath, Sales Director at Allman. I lead our sales and marketing efforts. I have been with Allman for 7 years, and I've been in the technical writing and training development space for 16 years. We help manufacturers teach their audience how to operate, test, and service equipment. And we do that through technical writing services. So developing everything from operator manuals to service manuals. And we also develop things like SOPs and work instructions for your frontline workforce. And lastly, we have a separate team that develops training. So we do a lot of online training development, instructor-led training, and even some custom applications, things like interactive and animated schematics.
Wonderful. Great to have you here. Tom?
My name is Tom Bellhumer. I'm a Senior Strategic Account Executive here at Mavenoid. Mavenoid is a support automation platform purpose-built for companies that sell products and devices to specifically remove friction from the use of that product. So that could be, troubleshooting. It could be post-sale parts and accessories, add-ons. It could be pre-sale evaluation. Anything that a customer is going to be interacting with a product in order to identify what is going to be best for them or how to use. We want to make sure that we're there to help make that as seamless a process as possible.
Fantastic. So your two companies have partnered together to give product and device manufacturers the tools they need to build high-quality customer support experiences. Allman is a leader in creating the highest quality support documentation, which makes it a natural fit with Mavenoid, whose mission it is to deliver virtual product support that helps people learn about, buy, and fix their products and devices. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about your perspectives on customer support and the variety of ways that companies can drive customer engagement and business efficiency through a well-considered support strategy. Let's start with what comprises a successful customer support strategy. Tim, let's start with you. From your perspective, what does it take to build customer support that gives an organization an edge over its competitors?
Yeah, it starts with a mindset and a culture at the top of the organization first. The differentiator now more than ever is service. It's ease of doing business. And I saw this on a recent LinkedIn post that Mavenoid actually did, and I loved it. And it said, it's actually about the effort the customers have to put in. The more frictionless and smooth their journey, the more loyal they are. Now, OEMs by their nature, they're focused on the product, right? Engineering, production, sales, it's all geared to develop products that solve problems and then sell those products. So customer support, the training, the manuals, those are usually secondary. Now, more tactically, the customers who are building the successful strategy, it's really three things. First, their information is accurate. They don't have outdated or non-related content in their manuals. Second, it's easy to find or access. So they are giving this information to the customer where the customer is looking for it. And then third, it's consistent. So they are maintaining their content and updating it appropriately.
Okay, interesting. Tom, what are your thoughts then from a technology perspective on how companies should think about designing their support strategy to build loyalty over the competition?
I think that the part about building loyalty is probably the most important. I think that, we don't need to look very far to understand what has worked and what hasn't worked. If we take a look at Amazon, they provided the 2-day shipping. That was sort of above and beyond, and it was sort of revolutionary when it first happened. And now we're in a situation where the first thing you look for is, can I have 2-day shipping? And if you don't, then you're probably going to go try to find it somewhere else. So when it comes to, support and the design, I think there's three main things to keep in mind. One is you're going to meet them where they are. If a customer wants to engage with you over the phone, via chat, via email, social media, whatever the medium is, you need to be able to provide that channel for them, because every customer is going to want to interact with you in a different way. And being able to cover all those bases is that first opportunity to provide the convenience of being able to remove that friction. The second piece is, got to keep it simple, right? If somebody wants to identify what their problem is, there's probably a good chance that they don't know what the solution is. And so if you're only providing what the solution is, but you don't have the opportunity to help them identify what problem they're actually having in order to get to that solution, that's your first sort of gap. So being able to shorten that help distance, be able to take the language that the individual is using to put them as close to that solution as possible, and then being able to present it in a very, rich media, visually digestible way for them to be able to follow the instructions to get back using that product that they intended in the first place. The last piece I'll say is, every journey needs to be designed with the ability to have it be as seamless as possible. And, not every solution is going to be solved via, automation or self-service. But there is a number of different things that an individual or customer has tried that by the time they get escalated to that, that call center or that technician, a lot of that information should be passed over to make sure that that experience isn't redundant and frustrating for that individual. Again, we want to make sure that however we come in, whatever it is that we do there, wherever we end up, it's as seamless as possible. And I think if we think about those three things, meeting the customer where they are, keeping it simple, and making it seamless, that would be my advice from a technology standpoint.
Okay, so taking your points together, then it's about making sure you have the most accurate documentation and then presenting that in a way that's easy for your customers to access and understand and meets their expectations. This helps meet their expectations, right? And delivers them the exact information that they need quickly so they can get on with their day. Instead of spending all day long on the phone trying to troubleshoot. Okay, so we've also seen research that shows meeting customer expectations is really the key to building brand loyalty, and this aligns really well with that research. So let's turn now to what it takes to make this product support experience come to life. Tim, let's start with you. Can you share with our audience the process that your organization takes to create support documentation for the companies that you work with?
Yeah, the process is fairly straightforward, but it's definitely not easy. So there's a few key things we'll need. The ideal scenario is we have engineering information available. CAD is a big one. Also things like a bill of material. Ideally, we also have access to the product itself, especially if it's a service or repair manual. And then if we can get that in one of our teardown facilities, or what's more common is we go on site to get access to the equipment. Then third is we'll need access to the subject matter expert so they can provide us information and answer questions. Now, access to the physical product is probably the most difficult of those three, but if we can get two of the three, we're in pretty good shape. Now, in many cases, we are updating an existing manual, so we'll have a foundation to build from. But we also start from a blank page quite a bit. So in those cases where we're starting from a blank page, we can help our customers build an outline, which is effectively the table of contents, and that's going to be our guide to developing the documentation.
Okay. A lot of the product manufacturers you work with have more complex equipment, and I imagine that words alone are not enough to provide the documentation they need. So how does your organization think about the role of visual imagery in the documentation materials that you create, and what is that process like?
Yeah, a picture is worth 1,000 words, right? And that's true in technical documentation as well. If you were trying to teach someone to tie their shoes and couldn't use images, it would probably take you thousands of words. So there's two things we do. First, we leverage CAD whenever possible to create line art, but photos work great as well. The trend we're definitely seeing, though, is it's more pictures, it's more videos, and it's less words. I hear it all the time. Show me what to do. Don't tell me what to do.
Okay. Tom, what's Mavenoid's point of view on this?
I think very similar to Almonds. I think the big thing that we really believe is that, you know, people are looking for instant gratification more than ever. And if they need to look for something or pay attention to something longer than that half second that they are with, you know, everything else, it's really important for them to make sure that they can get the answers that they want immediately. And a lot of the times when we're talking about products and devices, there are step-by-step pieces. You have to do one thing before the other. And being able to have that in very digestible bite-sized components that incorporate both text, images, and video allows the outcome for that individual to be much higher because we're incorporating, you know, all the different tools that are available, but we're making sure that they only have to focus on what's right in front of them at that particular time.
Okay, so whether it's words or images, we just need to make sure we're giving people the information that they need to diagnose and troubleshoot their support questions. I'm interested to talk now a little bit about that diagnosis process, which is, you know, how do we know that the customer is actually asking the right question about the right problem that they're having? So Tim, I'm interested to hear how Almond thinks about the need to diagnose a support scenario and then present the correct troubleshooting information. How does that factor into the way that you create content and documentation?
Diagnostics are tricky. You need to first invest in the foundational things like theory of operation material and good schematics. That's why the manual cannot be an afterthought. If it's done right, it should serve as the foundation for everything else in your product support repertoire. Most of our customers are in the heavy equipment manufacturing industry, and they generally have a 5 to 7 step critical thinking path or process that they're trained to follow. And it's really an exercise in critical thinking and resources, knowing what's available to you and then how to find the right resources. And that's where Mavenoid comes into play and why I think the Almond and Mavenoid partnership is so powerful. But again, it all starts with the foundational technical knowledge and making sure it's accurate, understandable, and accessible.
Interesting. So Tom, how does Mavenoid think about this from the perspective of using technology to zero in on a cause and then surfacing the right information to troubleshoot?
Yeah, well, I think it all starts with what does success look like? What does good look like? And for Mavenoid, we particularly focus on self-service resolution, which means that the individual is able to come in, identify their problem, identify the resources to be able to solve it, and then they are able to actually solve that on their own. When you think about something from that perspective, it is much more impactful because, again, people are coming to you to be able to solve for something. If your metric for success is just deflection, right? We didn't have to worry about it getting to the call center. That doesn't necessarily mean that the individual solved their problem. It means that they probably put it aside for now, and then they're eventually going to come in through, some other channel. Being able to make sure that everything is calibrated around the success of that individual solving the problem is really where our foundation comes from. That allows us to understand, what small step-by-step guides can help, which ones are not helpful, so we can close the loop to optimize. Allows us to understand, our AI is trained for product and devices so that we can shorten that distance to help, making sure that people don't come in, again, saying, I need to change out the gaskets. How do I do that? It's more, I've got water everywhere. How do we make sure that we can take those symptoms and correlate them to the solution and put those instructions in front of them in a way that allows them to, again, service that problem in a way that they can solution for it?
Okay. what comes to mind are a lot of consumer-facing technologies where this process makes sense. Like, for instance, if we're fixing a lawnmower or a headset. But what about even more complex equipment? You kind of alluded to this earlier, Tim. More complex equipment or industrial equipment that requires additional support from a live agent or even a field technician. How does documentation come into play in those scenarios? You have a very different audience.
Yeah, a lot of what I said about diagnostics applies here. And there's been two constants in my 16-year career doing this. Every year, the equipment gets more complex. And every year, the OEMs are demanding that the information is simplified. And actually, their audience is demanding that the information is simplified. So it's a huge challenge. So going back to the fact that it's still critical for those technicians or end users to have that strong technical foundation in the systems that make up the machine. So in our world, it's a lot of electrical, it's hydraulics, it's engines. And then again, it goes back to knowing your resources and knowing how to find the information. But again, it starts with that foundation about having that manual that's accurate, up to date, and accessible.
Tom, how about you? What are your thoughts on this?
I think the reality of the situation is that nobody has ever really come to Mavenoid saying that they need more documentation. The reality is that they have everything they need. Their customers just can't leverage it to find the solution for the problem that they're having in order to execute on it. And that's where, we come in. Again, we can't do our job without companies like Allman. They need to be able to create that documentation for us to be able to make sure that it's very digestible for that end user. So when we think about, the complexity that comes through, we work with companies that have, tower cranes or, large industrial equipment from, forklifts and conveyor belts. There is, from a technician side, these people are trained, they've been to school, they understand exactly how to fix things, but they might not be product experts in that company's product or device. And so being able to help them bridge the gap to understand, all right, start here, work through these steps, and ultimately you're going to come out with the end result. That's where Mavenoid comes in. We're not here to teach somebody, how to remove a faceplate or change the wiring. It's what faceplate do we remove based on the symptoms that they're seeing, and then what wiring do we alter based on, the results that we want to be able to achieve.
Okay. We've spoken a lot about what it takes to make a good customer support experience. So now I'd like to think about, what does a bad customer support experience look like? Tim, what are some common mistakes that you witness manufacturers making when they build support documentation?
Yeah, this is a great question. And for us, it's like Groundhog's Day. It's the same thing almost every time. So it's a few different versions. The first one is you have someone who really isn't qualified or ends up doing a poor job. For example, like an entry-level engineer who just doesn't have the experience. What's most common, though, is the manual is assigned to the subject matter expert. So it's an engineer or a product manager who already has too much on their plate and they're never going to get it done. Or it gets done poorly, or they get it done, but it's not even close to being understandable from the end user's perspective. What happens often is it gets put on someone else's pile, and then they also aren't paying attention to the basics, right? So it's not formatted well. It doesn't have an interactive table of contents, or going back to images, it doesn't have a good use of graphics, right? The other thing that I see quite a bit, especially in our world, is you're not paying enough attention to your audience's biggest pain points. So electrical is a huge one. It's one of the biggest heartburns for technicians. It's complex, it's dangerous, and it runs everything. So just not paying attention to those key areas. And all these mistakes, really what they mean is you're going to pay for it on the back end, right? With frustrated customers and an overwhelmed call center.
Okay, that makes sense. Tom, what about you working with automated remote support? What are some common mistakes that you witness?
So I think there's a few. One we've sort of touched on before, but it's identifying what good looks like. Making sure that people understand that, self-service resolution versus something like deflection is going to, move the needle for a business. I think the other piece is there are so many different pieces of technology out there today that being able to identify a technology and a partner with domain expertise is incredibly important. Everything that we do at Mavenoid is purpose-built for products and devices. And that's important because it allows us to, again, fix the number one problem immediately out of the gate, which is how do we take somebody's symptoms or the problem that they're having and put them in touch with the right solution. Again, people have all the documentation, they just can't find where it is and how to use it. So if you've got an AI model trained that is purpose built to identify what are people saying, right? I've got a humming noise, I've got a clicking noise. If they can describe the problems that they're having in their own language, and then that AI model can then put them in touch with that solution that solves it, that's the probably the biggest component there. And so understanding that purchasing or partnering with a company that has pre-trained and you're able to experience all of the benefits from all of the companies that came prior, that's a huge leg up versus being able to purchase sort of a large company that has AI, but ultimately it's a vanilla box, and you need to train it yourself. You need to be able to do all the work to make sure that you can get it to put somebody close to that solution. And so that domain expertise, again, particularly with products and devices, because of the complexity that's involved in it, is probably my number one recommendation when it comes to trying to solve the problem that these companies are trying to deal with.
Okay. So we know some of the pitfalls we need to watch out for the folks in the audience. What are some measures of success they can look at to know they're moving in the right direction? So Tim, let's start with you. How do you think about what success looks like?
This is one of the biggest challenges for us and our customers, right? How do you measure the ROI on the manual you developed? And in our world, unfortunately, it's still pretty all anecdotal. The customer tells us it's better, or in some cases, but this is rare, they're tracking their call center volume and can tie it back to that. Not to mention things like, what do you know, or how do you improve it, right? What's lacking? What does the end user like and not like? Many of our relationships start because the OEM has either fielded so many angry calls from their customers or dealers that they finally decide to invest in their product support documentation, or they don't have the time and skills internally, so they just decide to outsource it to a professional. So going back to the Allman and Mavenoid partnership, the analytics and the ability to see what is being searched, what is being resolved without a call is a game changer.
All right, interesting. Tom, what about you? How do you think about measuring success here?
Yeah, I think, again, starting with success is identifying what is good and what do you want to succeed with. And so being able to have that, sort of beating a dead horse here, but that self-service resolution, because that's the only pure indicator that you can get as a business that allows you to understand that customer came in, they had a problem, and then they left with the solution. And when you can sort of, wrap everything around that as a focal point, it becomes incredibly powerful because you can start closing the loop. I think the other pieces that are important are understanding that, does the solution provide transparency behind what's going on with the interactions with that documentation? Like Tim mentioned, so you can start to understand, is this an actual product issue where something is broken, or is this a user error? I think when we think about products and devices, much more often it's a user error than it is anything else. And those user errors aren't very easy to just say, oh, we'll go ahead and make a change on the product and then get the manufacturers involved and start pumping them out. So there needs to be some things that are put in place for that user error. And being able to distinguish between the two with that transparency on, how a customer is coming in, how they're working with your documentation is particularly important. I think the last thing I would say is, making sure that the information that's provided takes into account where the friction is starting, right? You can have friction when it comes to what product do I buy? And so being able to help them understand, hey, if you need, 120 watts versus 80, you might want to go with, one model versus the other. If you're sitting there and you're trying to understand, did somebody come in and just try and file for a warranty claim, or did they start in the troubleshooting and then realize that it's something that they couldn't fix, ended up in the warranty claim in the project registration, and then they were able to seamlessly take that into account. So it's understanding that not everything happens in a vacuum. People don't come to do one thing, with your product on their website. It's they generally come in to start one thing and then end up somewhere else. Can you follow that track? Can you identify where that friction is so that you can go ahead and try and put pieces in place to remove it as much as possible?
Okay. If we're talking about measuring success, Tim hinted at this earlier, but Mavenoid's analytics. Tom, can you share a little bit more about this? How does Mavenoid capture the success metrics we're talking about?
Yeah, so I think what's really interesting about the way that Mavenoid does the analytics is, again, because everything's based off of self-serve resolution, it allows us to hone our AI and machine learning around those metrics to make sure we're understanding how to get better. We can do analytics based on the actual product, not necessarily just the problem. So we can see, what products are having what problems that are coming through with it. We can understand how that's happening in real time. So if we need to get ahead of a situation where, we've got one company that basically swapped out some metal screws for some plastic screws on one of their components. And within 30 days, they started getting a lot of interesting sort of feedback or people looking for, hey, this isn't working, my screw's sort of melting. And they were able to identify that as a problem to be able to get a fix out into the wild, even before, it had to get all the way down the stream where it was talking to customer success folks, agents on the phone, and then talking to product. And we can capture that right at the beginning. The last thing that I think is incredibly helpful about the way that Mavenoid does the analytics is it doesn't just capture what you do ask or what inquiries you do have as a customer. It starts to understand what are things that are being asked that are not addressed at all, so that we can start doing the gap analysis and understand, all right, we've got a lot of folks asking about this particular product that are coming in, and it doesn't seem to be starting for them right away. What are the things that we would need to be able to put in place to help them get to that resolution quicker? So again, every company comes to us with documentation, but it's only through the understanding of how that documentation is being used can you start to identify where the gaps are and where you might need to go back to the drawing board to understand how do we fill that to make sure that we've got a solution for every individual and every situation that they might come into contact with.
Thank you. That's really helpful. Okay, my final question for both of you. What advice do you have for product manufacturers when it comes to customer support? And what haven't we covered? Tim, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, I'll reinforce two things that came up today. Tom mentioned Amazon. I think manufacturers need to take a page out of the Amazon playbook, which is just how easy they make it to buy and do business with them, right? Which is why I have packages lining up on my door every single day. And then the second thing I'll say, and I'll repeat it because I love it so much, is that post Mavenoid had a couple weeks ago. The differentiator is about the effort customers have to put in with you and your products. The more frictionless and smooth the journey, the more loyal they are.
Thank you. Tom, any parting words of wisdom for the audience?
I think that, putting yourself in the end user position is incredibly important, but I think you need to keep in mind that not all customers have as much information about the product as you do. You are the ones that manufactured it. And so being able to identify, there is going to be user error. And, how do we, again, identify areas where we can be better when it comes to that convenience, right? Help documentation should not be a secondary thought. It shouldn't just be hey, we've got it up there, they'll go ahead and find it. Because at the end of the day, if your engagement with that customer is what's going to generate long-term customers over the lifetime of that individual, it starts with every interaction you have. And interactions aren't always the best ones to begin with. It's not just somebody coming and saying, I need a new part or I want to buy a new product. A lot of the times it comes from some place of, frustration or friction. It's not that that's a problem. What's a problem is if you don't identify how to fix it very quickly and paper over that friction to remove it as much as possible. And so being able to think from that person's perspective, again, at the end of the day, if a customer has an issue with a product, the number one thing they want to do is solve it so they can get back to using that product. Remove ourselves from the equation. How do we make sure that that customer can enjoy the product that they purchased from the get-go? And if we can take that mentality, it allows us to be understanding we've got to be convenient. We've got to meet them where they are. We've got to be able to be, bite-sized, visually appealing. And at the end of the day, being able to work with a customer or a partner that is purpose-built in this area is incredibly important, because that way it's not just the software, but you're getting the expertise of all the customers that individual works with. And again, a lot of things are not taken at face value, and being able to have that deep expertise is incredibly important. Again, particularly in this product and device space where it is quite complex.
Great. Well, I appreciate both your time today. Before we sign off, where can folks find you?
Yeah, so Tim Milbrath, you can look me up on LinkedIn, and you can learn more about Allman at Allman Inc., ALMONINC.com.
You can find me on LinkedIn as well, or just shoot by the website, mavenoid.com. Plenty of resources there for you to understand more, but would love to entertain any conversation with anybody interested in learning more.
Thank you, and thanks to our audience for joining us today.